All right, so I'm going to talk about this project I worked on, which involves breaking down films, dialogue by gender and age. But really, this is a talk about the zen of doing work like this. And I think it's going to echo a lot of the pain that people have done done types of projects like this in the past have felt. So the impetus behind this project was an article I'd written in February with a friend on the Bechdel Test. And for those that aren't familiar, the Bechdel Test is kind of a half joke in feminist literature that involves three criteria. One, you have for a film. One has to have at least two women in it who talk to each other about something besides a man. And this seems like a pretty low bar, but in fact, there's a site called BechdelTest.com where people go and rate films on this criteria, and like Kung Fu Panda 3 does not pass this test, which is ridiculous because it's a really low bar. So I did a project where I looked at a lot of different cuts of data involving films that pass this test and don't pass this test. A lot of it has to do with the fact, from a data perspective, of the gender of the writers and the producers and directors. Basically, you can go to this data viz and see how the data changes based on who's behind the scenes, not necessarily who's on screen. I did this, and the response was terrible. It was great from like people who already were in the echo chamber of lack of gender inclusivity in film, but in terms of people who were outside of that world, they were like, this is bullshit for a million reasons. One of them, the most obnoxious, is that, well, films that are based on history or war, like they have to have men in them. What are we gonna do? Like change the gender? So, which is a valid piece of feedback, but like Hollywood isn't entirely war movies or historic movies. So there was lots of that type of pushback. So I went on a revenge spree, and I worked on this project called Working with Film Dialogue for 2,000 screenplays broken down by gender and age. And what I'm gonna talk about is the pain of making this project, which was so immense. And I'm also going to talk about the zen of that pain and why it's important for people who do projects like this to have comfort in what it takes to put together projects that involve this much data. So I'm just going to give you a taste of what it is. We start out with just looking at the dialogue of Disney movies, so you can find your favorite Disney princess or prince on this list in terms of where they fall from a male dialogue perspective versus gender balance versus women-leading dialogue. And then we looked at the data set for just about 2,000 screenplays. You can see that by genre. So here's action and drama. And if you're a Star Wars fan, you could search and see all the Star Wars films. Anyway, there's a lot of ways to cut through this data. And I'm going to talk about how I got it. The first thing that we did was realize there's no place to find clean dialogue data on the internet. We found this corpus from Cornell, which is a lot of conversation, but actually not a lot of movies, about 600. So the first thing we did was saw what it looked like, and not entirely. This is one of the first visits that we did. Not entirely far from the final version in terms of the gender breakdown. Actually, no, the other way around. This was like a lot of female-leaning movies. For this screenshot that I have here. But this was really promising. We're like, okay, there's interestingness in the data. We know how to pull it together. Let's do this for all the movies in Hollywood. So from there, we needed to figure out how do we get scripts. And again, there's no like scripts.com where you can just download all the scripts. We found about 30 sources, which are basically totally illegal. And like some of them are more legal than others, but like I went through all of the Reddit threads that mentioned film scripts and downloaded as many as I could with the woman I was working on this with. And we ended up with about 8,000 film scripts. So here we have, let's find a good example. All right, that's Indiana Jones. Okay, well, anyway, we have a lot of film scripts, and one of the challenges we had was, okay, now that we have these film scripts, how do we get down to the end data point of gender by broken down for the entire film? So the logical steps for the data science data analysis people in the room is, okay, we have a film, we have dialogue by character, and then a gender to the character. And there's a lot of logical steps there. And the woman I was working with was like, Matt, you're crazy. Like, to go through all of those steps of connecting the data would just be an immense amount of work, which it absolutely was. The way that we figured out to get gender was actually to use IMDb. So this is The Matrix, and here's Keanu Reeves, and he plays Neo. And if you look at Keanu Reeves' profile, he has this fun little actor link, and believe it or not, it's mostly accurate. So actors, men have actors, women have actresses, almost with 99.5% accuracy. So we were really happy about that. So now it was just a matter of connecting Neo's lines to the script. The problem is that scripts aren't perfectly structured. So I'm just going to pick one at random. Here is Memento, and here is a line from Leonard. So there's some logic here, like Leonard in all caps, and then some text, and then Teddy. So we had to write a parser to grab this text and account for all the different permutations of how people write scripts. So there's this format, there's the alt caps plus a colon, left justified, and we just found every imaginable permutation of how people write scripts according to characters, and that went into a big Python function. So this is a user-facing version of that you can find on GitHub. And here we have the Pulp Fiction script. And again, like the formatting of all caps and text below it. And if you click this magical button, it outputs the characters and the number of words they spoke. And then obviously we need to tag them by male or female, which I'll get to in a second. But this is the spirit of what we had to do, is figure out how to parse all these scripts given all the various formats. And I've even talked about the fact that not all of them are copy and pastable. This is the RoboCop script from, I don't even know what year, but like 1986. Like, they didn't have PDF back then. So this is probably like a scanned thing, and it's not selectable. So we had to find a tool library that allowed us to grab the text and make it machine readable to then run through this parser. So there's just, again, a lot of pain of like getting these PDFs and like pulling our hair out of like, okay, we have to figure out how to parse this. So going through all these 8,000 scripts and trying to get to a sample size is around 2,000. And the reason why we went with 2,000 was arbitrarily almost. It was big enough where I felt like people wouldn't bring up the, well, you haven't considered war movies argument. Because that's really what I wanted to get past, was all of the small things that allowed people to not really understand the data in the Bechdel Test project. Like, they couldn't get past the fact that the Bechdel Test is flawed in many ways, and therefore the data is flawed. I wanted to have this project be as clean as possible so that we wouldn't fall into arguments around methodology and just ignore the data completely. So once we parsed all of these scripts by character, then it was a matter of matching the characters' names to the IMDb pages. So here we have The Matrix, but let's go ahead and check out RoboCop. This is the new version, so just bear with me and imagine it's the old one. But here we have Alex Murphy / RoboCop, and we would have to go through the script and figure out what is the best match between the character name and from the script and then the final name in the IMDb page. And yes, the names change all the time. Writers have a character that was in the script and not in the movie, and vice versa. They change the name. Sometimes they even change the gender. It was immensely dirty from a data perspective, and I spent hours and, I mean, probably days just cleaning the data in a SQL database, making sure that these two columns, I know this looks a little bit confusing, but like, this is from the script, or this is from the script, and this is our guess in IMDb, and making sure these were as close as possible, because it did screw up sometimes when we were trying to do the matching process. So the reason why I wanted to go through all of this is, it's again going back to that Zen argument. And has anyone read Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance or heard of it? Okay, it's like a really, really weird book written in like the 70s. but it spoke to me a lot because it has this anecdote about motorcycle maintenance. And basically, motorcycle maintenance is kind of like this project, where the way to repair motorcycles, you have to take it apart completely, and to fix like a very small thing. And if you forget one little piece, when you put it back together again, you have to like take it apart completely again. And some people want to pull their hair out and they're like, I don't want to screw with this, I'm taking it to a shop. But there's other people who actually find that really comforting. And they like the process of taking it apart again and putting it back together. And yes, that's going to take another 48 hours because I forgot that one bolt. But there's some solace and comfort in that process. So I think what I got from this project was understanding that same Zen feeling of spending another 6 hours cleaning character names has a lot of merit to it. And you really have to have a lot of like appreciation for the final product, even though it took a lot of effort and what some people would consider a very tedious task. So anyway, you can see the final product. I'm out of time on polygraph.cool/films. There's a lot of great data viz that I didn't get into, but it's a really interesting data set, and it's totally open source. You can play around with it and add additional cuts and you can also get in touch with me if you want even deeper data that I couldn't post because it, again, would have been illegal from a script standpoint. Thank you.